It's lovely to be in the Science Museum. I love the amount of evidence there is of extreme senses of possibility with a meticulous ability to execute, which feels like a pretty important combination. I'll give you the classic police intro. Done 10 years. Started out in Hackney. Not like Hackney is now, like Hackney was then. Then I went to Brixton, went to the Gangs and Guns Command. Went to Waltham Forest, and then most recent posting, 2 years in counter-terrorism, running all the manhunts post-Westminster and London Bridge attacks. Toughest 2 years of my life. Industrial quantities of adrenaline were pumped. It's a bit like The Bodyguard, but with much less shagging. So it's lovely to be here. I really, really am a big fan of being brave and being braver. There's some pretty brave people in the police. I've been unbelievably impressed by how brave my colleagues are running into things when rightly everyone else is sensibly running away from them. And the majority of us joined because we want to stop bad things happening, and when they do happen, we want to be there for people as best we can. I've loved the operational day job, loved it, but at nights my passion really has been how do we help our brave people to be braver when it comes to reducing crime and boosting public confidence in policing. And I think there are basically three things, which is what I'm going to talk about, that I've learnt quite a lot around. And one is hierarchy, two is blame, and three is control. And these are the things that get in the way, I think, sometimes of us all being braver. So, but total transparency. We care massively in policing, and I care massively in policing, and I suspect you guys all care, because you couldn't read the Evening Standard or the papers and not, about violence and preventing violence. And that is our job. Violence in all its forms, whether it be gang violence, child abuse, street violence, sexual violence, violence against our values, which is what terrorism is, violence against our property in terms of burglary, violence, 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 violence against ourselves in terms of suicide. And it is not easy peasy lemon squeezy. It is difficult, difficult, lemon difficult. So in that respect, I'm really hopeful that I can persuade you, inspire you today about what you guys can do as the most influential audience I have ever been a part of to help us. So let's begin. One, hierarchy. Boom. I used to love a hierarchy, loved a hierarchy, undoubtedly why I joined the police, love a ladder, like to know who's got the power, where's the decisions, etc., etc. But by about 3 years in, no love hierarchy anymore. Basically feels like it's a massive source of disempowerment. The cultural sludge, the innovation killer, the going through the motions, oh, well, I'd like to do something about it, but I mean, it's fucked, isn't it, really? So we can't have to be the bosses to do something about that. And I couldn't really go on with that any longer. So had to try and turn tide because disempowerment and negativity feels so infectious. And during 20 seconds of radical courage, pitched to the commissioner that we should start the Commissioners 100. That I'd start the Commissioners 100, but we'd a bit use his hierarchy to help disrupt the hierarchy. So we had 5 rules. We were basically a frontline do tank, and we roamed around the 40,000 people of the Met Police like a pirate ship, trying to make things happen. Our 5 rules were first name terms only. Big deal in a uniformed organisation. So the commissioner, who was a great man, was Bernard. Second rule, no more money and no more people, and this must not be an excuse that we don't get on with it. Third rule, no peacocking, no seagulling, and no ostriching. Fourth rule, practical action, not strategic blah. And fifth rule, personal risk and responsibility in action, not just shopping lists for mummy and daddy who are higher up the hierarchy. So we went for it, and we did pretty well. We started with 15 people, and then we got 50, and then we got 100, with the aim to get 1,000, and then 10,000, and then we'd have 20%. We'd reached a tipping point. We'd tip the Met. Hooray! Overthrow the hierarchy. We ran 15 events and sprints over 5 years on all the big issues, tech and talent and culture and efficiency, and bang. And we ended up probably through a series of very cool Dragon to Den pitches, and they were very cool. And don't judge me too harshly, we just got laptops in the Met last year. So we are, this was groundbreaking at the time. We got probably 10 big game-changing ideas through. Hooray! So it did work to a degree, but it wasn't really enough, because about another 50 excellent ideas ended up in the graveyard of middle management permafrost. And we got to 1,000, pretty good, but that was only 2%, because when we tried to franchise, we couldn't get it to stick. So the learning there was, yes, removing hierarchy is a cracking start. So back to my earlier point, very keen to remove that in this room, therefore. So my sense often when I'm as a police officer and say things like I've got to rush off to Scotland Yard and sound like a total dickhead, people think like, oh, good, well, okay, good. Well, she's got violence, hasn't she? That's really her job. And this is the hard thing, is that policing in itself is a hierarchy and propagates a hierarchy in society. So it is the ultimate power over our peers. We're able to take away people's liberty. But it unintentionally, therefore, often disempowers lots and lots and lots of other people who could be making a big difference too. So I just want to kind of challenge that now in terms of not the parent. Maybe back in the day when we hung out in the village, or a lot of time in our family or schools or workplaces, sort of formal authority type figures like the police did have a lot of hard power. But now in a world of soft power, you guys have unbelievable levers of influence when it comes to the online and the public space. And yes, of course, the networks, social networks and the celebs, but the algorithms are pretty awesome in terms of what the brands have managed to make happen. If I see that pregnancy ad one more time. So in terms of who's actually got some real influence, you guys in this room have. So I really hope that we can work together on what we do about the violence. So, full permission given. However, it still won't be enough. We've removed the hierarchy, but it's not enough. Because secondly, blame. Blame seems to be a real challenge in our organization, and I think in general. You'll all have seen Brené Brown's video on blame, probably, but I'm going to play it again because I basically think it should be watched every day because it's the best 3 minutes you can spend.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brené. I am a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house, I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And the first, a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who's my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, This is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the na thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
Who's a blamer? Yeah. So this is big for us because of what she says about blame being pain and discomfort leaving the body. And in policing, we hold a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort in a 30-year career. Most of us join because of trauma. I joined because at 11, my dad dropped dead on a family holiday in front of my eyes. That's a very common experience for my peers, and we want to make it better for people. When you're in it, you're dealing with people who are going through enormous trauma in terms of their background, whether that be addiction, whether that be mental health, whether that be abuse. And we're a first frontline emergency service, so we just get involved in a lot of very traumatic situations. So we hold a lot of trauma in our workforce, and it's very hard, therefore, to find the outlets of that, to move beyond blame into accountability. I think that a lot of us feel angry about what we end up dealing with because there's no right, wrong, good, bad answer. You know, whether it be that you're going into a family and mum's suffering with addiction, there's a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, there's no sheets on any of the mattresses, there's hardly any food in the cupboards. Do you or do you not take them into police protection? Does that or does that not help in their long-term life chances? One of the toughest things for me was interviewing a paedophile who has a penchant for routinely touching up 8-year-old girls on buses, gone to prison a number of times for it. It's all on CCTV. He admitted it. He was back off to prison, and he wept and wept across the table, begging for chemical castration. On what on earth does he do? And how does he control that? And it's an interesting wider point, as porn addiction is rampant in our society, and people struggle with that sort of stuff of how are we helping people, and how is the criminal justice system helping people, whilst also rightly doing the best possible thing for victims and to protect the vulnerable people of our society. It's tough, tough, tough stuff. And the other kicker on the blaming point is that actually, as we talk to our workforce a lot about not blaming each other and being accountable or not blaming other services, is actually our job is to be a professional blamer. That's actually what we do. As in, we go into situations that you're the victim, you're the suspect, you come with me, etc. So also quite hard in a space where actually it's all about vulnerability and how do we get the best outcomes from people in that grayscale space that are masters of the criminal justice system, etc., want us to serve up a victim and a suspect. So it's a fascinating area for us. But this is the most helpful video when it comes how do we help people. So one of the things that I've done is co-founded Police Now on the basis that given the level of trauma, and that's understandable on the job that we do, maybe there's only a very few people who can do it for 30 years and not get into a blaming space. So ergo, let's open the doors and let our great leaders and people out into other professions, and let's excite more people to come in. So we set up Police Now based on Teach First and Teach for America, a 2-year leadership program if you're a high-octane grad. Afterwards, by all means, go to Goldman's, but come to us for 2 years first. We'll give you 24 streets that you will be the officer in charge for, the mini chief constable. We'll train you in 6 weeks. We went out of the Met as an independent social enterprise. A third of our curriculum's on resilience and that well-being space in order to hold people into a place of accountability, not blame, and having an impact every 100 days. They have to give impact presentations, little mini TED Talks on what they've done for their communities. it's going pretty well. We're in our 4th year. We've had 800 people through. It's more competitive to get into than Oxbridge. And the research is showing that amongst young people, confidence in policing is 17% higher in Police Now wards as opposed to non-Police Now wards. Applications are open. So anyone or anyone you know, come and join us, come and help us. I'm hopeful that this starts to trailblaze some of the realities of actually it's okay to come and make a difference, and then it's okay to leave, because a bit sometimes you have that sense of left after 5 years, had a breakdown, can't cope, as opposed to thanks so much for your service, which is what the Americans are so good at. So on this blame point, let me be clear back to my previous point under hierarchy of help us, please help us. I don't want anyone to misinterpret that of a blame space. It's not me saying, oh, you guys influence over online space and public space and the violence is ramping away, it's your fault. One's not saying that at all, and nor is one saying, I'd like to help, but really there's nothing we can do in policing, because that's not true either. And that's what's so annoying about this, is it's not your fault and it's not my fault, it's our collective responsibility. We've got to not blame each other, but we've got to hold each other to account. And that's maddening, because actually that sort of balanced, grayscale, collective approach is way less convenient than a phenomenally simple, extreme binary one. Which comes on to the next and final point around control. Who loves control? I am an absolute control freak. God, I love control. And I think it comes on to where being braver comes in to play. So the hardest time I think it is to be braver, or that I find hard, is when it's highly likely you'll fail. Because I think I just won't take it on. And the stuff that I find hardest to be braver about is the stuff that I really care about, but don't have much control over. Because those things feel immensely painful. And it's interesting, 100 years since the First World War, and the celebrations for that on Sunday, you think about how so many of those people were being brave when it was highly likely that they would personally fail and they would personally die on something around maintaining a sense of British values in a situation that was pretty hard to control. So I think it's a good space to think about around control and being braver. So in policing, we know a lot about failure. Every crime that we investigate is our failure to have prevented it in the first place. And we care hugely about violence when we don't necessarily have as much control as we would like. This guy is a very sexy Detroit cowboy, and also the grandfather of nonviolent communication. And what he interestingly propagates, and you'll have heard it all in the news, a public health approach to violence, violence as a contagion. That's absolutely what we see. Our suspects and perpetrators are our victims and witnesses of yesterday. Across all the violence, that's what we see, is that people who perpetrate have experienced in their past. It's absolutely a contagion, and the public health model is utterly the way to go. This guy, nonviolent communication, his view was that violence is a tragic suicidal expression of an unmet need. And I think that's absolutely right. It's a tragic cry for help, violence is. And that violence propagates violence. So don't use violence to solve violence. That is not the answer. Again, quite tricky for the police, because we ourselves are a violent force. As in, to take away somebody's liberty is a use of force, and therefore another violent contagion. So quite challenging, and arguably some would argue that our attempts to control it can therefore make it worse, because it's putting more violence into the system. So what have we tried to do about that? Well, I and some mates set up Take 90 earlier in the year. So this was about, okay, let's not pretend that we control everything. Let's push this wide. Let's learn from the marketeers. Let's try and sell off the positive and show, don't tell. We got 90 organizations together to back us. We had 5 WPP ad agencies, Grey, Hills and Knowlton, Conan Wolfe, PSB and Group M, who came together. We ran 3 100-day sprints to say, please help, what could we do? Ooh, how could we do this? The creative that one came up with in the campaign was around Take 90, based on the science. the museum would approve, that it only takes 90 seconds to let anger pass. Targeting low-level aggression and everyday violence in society and in public spaces and online. So trying to say, actually, on this contagion approach, everything that we can do to reduce the amount of contagion in society is a great, great thing. So let's start here. Let's get way more role modeling of how you manage difference in a fast-paced world. So we all know what it feels like to be in our lizard brain, and certainly my sister can provoke me like nobody else to get into my lizard brain. Normally, I would not be able to respond to her in 90 seconds if I lived in the 18th century. I'd have had to have written her a letter, and I would have had a lot more time to therefore come out of my lizard brain. But now I can send a snarky WhatsApp just like that. So this point of, as society and London and Britain gets more and more diverse, we have to navigate more and more difference, and we're asked to respond within 90 seconds. If we don't improve our emotional literacy, we're in real trouble. And what we'll see is, part of what we do see, a whole load of snarky role modeling of violent language, aggressive behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like, oh, it's a problem over there where so-and-so stabbing so-and-so. It's actually a problem like right here in our managing our own responses to stress and overwhelm, et cetera. So this was take 90. We had a very successful launch, hooray, all pro bono, but lots of people kindly ran the ads. Newsnight counted down from 90 seconds at the end of their show, hooray. The most exciting bit was the follow-through. So 9 out of 10 young people who saw the campaign say it helped them. 7 out of 10 felt the audience felt it addresses a serious problem in their daily life. 6 out of 10 said they'd used the tools from it, and 6 out of 10 said they'd spoken to others. Hooray, but we need more exposure. So if you're thinking at all, okay. Oh, hang on. This is my favorite, the crab. It's very friendly. Cross and then very friendly. So if you're thinking at all that you might have a kernel of idea about influencing violence, and you realize that, oof, there's no hierarchy and the police and mummy and daddy have not got this under control and can't solve it all single-handedly and alone, that maddeningly we can't blame them or anyone else for it either, and worse, we'll probably all fail. Still, let's do it. Please help us. Anywhere that you can get this, hooray. And in fact, you'll have way better ideas. Steph right here is our head of marketing. Purpose-led brand partnerships. We are in. We are so keen for that. Here's my final shares on what I've learned about being braver. And I, definitely have total failures of courage. And many people in my organization braver than me. But this is what I've learned about some of the be brave in the organization. 1, expect the wall of no. Feels like contractions in labor. I don't know, I don't have kids yet. But there seem to be a certain number of bricks that you have to just get through. So just like get on with it, suck it up, don't take it personally, keep going. In the end, you'll knock down all the bricks. I'm a big fan of relentless positivity and enthusiasm when it comes to the wall of no. That's hard because sometimes it makes me exhausted and very whiny. This is my phone screensaver in an attempt to remember that these are my choices, and maybe it's altruism, probably it's ego, but I've chosen to do this, and therefore I must find other outlets for my pain. 3, hashtag never settle. Not working out for me that well on the dating front, but when it comes to being brave at work, I think it's a winner. People are constantly trying to sell me grubby compromises, and I'm always saying, no deal. And then this, the most powerful one, the front step of Saatchi & Saatchi's nothing is impossible, and the power of repetition and priming, which you guys know more about than anyone. So let me end on that. If the power of repetition and priming is where it's at, let me just say one more time, as the marketeers of Britain, your contribution is utterly mission critical when it comes to violence, and we long to work out how we can help you and help us to sort that out.